Welcome back to Church in the World. This is part 3 of our discussion of education. And this is looking at the 2007 statement of the ELCA about education, which we've been talking about the last 2 days. This is the third and final day where we're going to talk about this. The content today is going to be a brief note about how the church and why the church, that is to say the ELCA and other religious bodies, might offer education themselves, even when it's not necessarily only religious. And then we're going to talk a little bit about higher education, that is to say colleges and universities. So the fourth part of this statement is all about the ELCA's educational ministries, colleges, schools, pre-K, etc. And the long and short of that fairly wordy piece of the document for our purposes that's going to be important is the ELCA makes the point that a Christian shoemaker doesn't put crosses on the shoes. They make excellent, high-quality shoes for the cost, right? That's what it is to be a Christian in terms of vocation in the world. So a Christian teacher and a Christian school are not going to go around creating special education in the sense of an education that's wholly different from what any other institution would create in terms of the content. What Christian schools are going to do is be committed to excellence and still be a community formed around the faith. And that's very important to understand. So all of this is to say that if you've ever been looking at or received a communication from a Lutheran or other religious institution, you want to be very intentional about what you're looking at. Is this institution billing itself as an excellent place for higher education? Or is it billing itself as an excellent place for an ideological education? Because those are different things, right? In a Lutheran school, you wouldn't go into a biology classroom and hear the Bible being recited, generally speaking, in terms of insight into human biology. And if you did, there would be a contrast or comparison to what the best science says at the moment. There are universities where that happens, if not in biology, then certainly in political discourse and philosophy and religious studies, and that is not helpful, right? The purpose of that class is not to make a person who understands Scripture better. There are classes, and hopefully will always be classes, that help us understand the Scriptures better, but they're called Scripture classes or Bible study classes. They're interpretations of and ways of scholastically encountering the Scriptures. And certainly religious institutions should offer those. What you've got to be careful of when what Lutherans intentionally avoid is creating a school that's about indoctrination, right? That is to say, always pushing a singular narrative around philosophy, around religion, around science. That can be very dangerous. Now, it's difficult to do that, of course, because there is such a thing as truth, and truth can look dangerously like an ideology when it's looked at from somebody who doesn't understand it. And so, for example, in this country, we've had a long series of discourses in the last couple of years about what truth even is constituted by, what sources can be trusted, these kinds of things. And without wading into that, at least in this video, what has to be understood is that there's a vast difference between saying, well, here are things that we can observe, and here's some research, and you can draw your own conclusions, but the best people who have done this research have drawn this conclusion, is radically different from saying, we unconditionally believe this particular thing, and we're going to thrust it into and under everything we teach. That's not appropriate to education, right? Any more than putting crosses on shoes because you're a Christian. Putting the crosses on the shoe doesn't really make the shoe better, and the purpose is to make the shoe to serve the neighbor, not to try to present yourself or what you believe, right? So that's what religious institutions should be doing when providing education. Now we're going to turn to the fifth part, which is perhaps a bit more interesting in terms of public policy and in terms of our life in the world, because the fact is that the statement talks about the need to provide higher education, that higher education has grown a lot since World War II, and we all know that, right? Expenses have also grown a whole lot. There have not been ideal solutions proffered. Students are carrying increasingly larger debt loads and requiring more time to complete their education. Now, this is being read to you and reported to you by somebody who was in baccalaureate program for 4 years and in seminary, which is a graduate school program, for 6. So that is 10 years of post-secondary education. That is a long time and a lot of debt, right? Even with quote unquote affordable, more affordable institutions. While college completion rates have improved among all income groups over the past 30 years, the gaps in completion rates between students who are affluent and those who are poor have also increased. There's all sorts of problems and there's all sorts of ways we need colleges and universities responding with scholarship and grant programs of their own privately. We need to be aware, though, that the opportunity gap is created by inadequate state and federal funding for students' financial aid. It just is. That's just where it is. Many low and middle income families find it difficult, if at all possible, to access colleges, and colleges struggle to extend financial aid while maintaining academic quality and financial viability. And so, here are some public policy remedies that the statement suggests. 1, increase state and federal funds for need-based financial assistance. Great, increase it to what level? Answer is until there is no longer an excessive high need for it. 2, support targeted incentive programs for low-income and underrepresented groups. So, in addition to higher funding overall for need-based, also incentive programs for certain groups of persons who are systemically having trouble accessing higher education. Increasing state subsidies to public institutions to ameliorate tuition increases and increase efficiency wherever possible. So fundamentally, bigger government support and more government monies, which means probably higher taxes on someone somewhere, which you'll notice has basically been the theme throughout this statement. Every time we're talking about any sort of education, unless it's offered by a private or religious institution, every time the statement functionally says there's going to have to be more revenue out of the government for this, and that is just going to mean more revenue going into the government, which is just going to mean higher taxes. Just FYI, this entire statement, that's unavoidable. And the reality is, and I think we covered this in the first part of the first video of this series on the topic, it is actually part of Christian vocation to be willing to pay higher taxes than I otherwise would so that more people can have access to excellent education. That is something I should want, period. That's just part of what this statement says is doctrine about how life in the world works for us. I would rather pay higher taxes so that more people can have a good education than pay lower taxes and deprive people of a good education, because education is important and it is a good. It's a public good as well as a personal good. So the ELCA is also urging colleges and universities to seek ways to redress the growing opportunity gap, to encourage members to help fund scholarships, especially for low-income students and congregations, to provide scholarship assistance to their students. We affirm the practice of providing financial assistance from the church and churches and congregations to specifically ELCA colleges and universities as a continuing commitment to them. And we call upon churchwide to work with synods to expand scholarships for United States and international students who need assistance. All of this, I warned you this would be a little bit briefer, right? A little simpler. It's very simple. If we want excellent education in the 21st century, we're going to have to pay for it somehow as a society. And this church teaches, the ELCA teaches, education is a good thing, and we should be willing to invest in it, right? And that doesn't mean that we pour money thoughtlessly and endlessly into the educational system any more than it would mean that when we talked about economic life, or when we talk about climate care, or when we talk about addressing racial inequity. You have to use methods that seem effective, right? And simply writing blank checks is not effective. The church has learned this to its detriment in its own life, right? Just having a lot of money doesn't make a successful congregation. But money is useful in hiring good and retaining good staff and teachers, in helping people who are disadvantaged access higher education, in creating facilities, And to be perfectly frank, what's underlying the whole statement is the system of wealth inequity across the nation, which creates educational inequity, which further reinforces wealth inequity, right? And so that has to be redressed in a systemic way, or we're never going to arrive at uh, high quality education available for all people. So that's what we're looking for, and that's simply the policies that we're talking about. Do you agree with them? Do you not? Do you have other thoughts? Is there something that I missed? Leave those questions or comments down below. I'd love to hear from you about this. This is the end of our 5th week of this series, believe it or not, and next week we're moving into some very non-controversial subjects. I look forward to talking about the incredibly boring topics with you of the social statements, and those social statements are going to be, we are talking about the 2009 Human Sexuality Statement and the 2011 Statement on Genetics. Nothing controversial, nothing upsetting, nothing that caused a small schism in the church, nothing that's been a source of conflict for decades. Very calm, very easy. I'm totally messing with you. In fact, the Human Sexuality Statement is so fraught in so many ways that at the end of this series, I think I might have to have a guest on to talk about it a little bit more. But the actual presentation of that content will start this coming Monday. That will be the day after tomorrow. Tomorrow, there will be a brief appendix video for you to just think about baptismal vocation in light of education, and we'll use the small catechism for that. And then on Monday, we'll start Human Sexuality Part 1. I hope that this has been enjoyable and informative for you. I hope you've been enjoying these videos. Please let me know. Give me a like, give me a subscribe if you are so inclined. I hope that you'll join us for Sunday morning worship. That link is in the description below. And until next time, God bless.